Welcome to episode 50 of Kontrarian Korner. I'm Ben Kelleran. Today we have a very special return guest on to talk with us about some of the recent moves in financial markets, some of the things that might be going on behind the scenes, and some of the things that people might be missing. But I think it'll be a fascinating conversation to kind of catch up on what he's seeing in the world and basically get a recap of maybe what's happened in the last couple of weeks and where things might be going. But Tom, thanks for coming back.
No problem, Ben. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, so I figured with all the recent chaos, at least in the last couple of weeks, as far as people reacting to tariffs or like trade wars, people talking about the US dollar losing reserve currency status, like there seems to be a lot of overreactions to what's been going on. But I'd be curious to hear where you want to take that thread, if you want to start with the US dollar or just general financial markets. I know you've talked a little bit about the kind of capital rotation and money flowing out of the U.S. and into other places. So I'll let you take it from there.
Well, let's just start with the beginning. There's a certain sect of people who are permanent dollar bears, right? And if you're a gold bug, then you're correct because gold is killing it right now, right? So the ultimate dollar bears are the gold bugs or the Bitcoin maxis, and they're kind of two sides of the same coin, or to quote Tom Stopper, the same side of two coins. But that's a short-term thing. And reality is that can be created on any given Tuesday because of the shape and structure of our capital markets. Because people can decide to move a large amount of money, and they can do so uneconomically if they so choose. One of the problems that we have in doing market analysis is that everybody believes in this kind of efficient markets theory, and that the markets actually work as free markets. And I'd like to believe in free markets. I'm kind of echoing stuff that Dexter White said to me in the past. Like, I'd like to believe our markets are free. I'd like to believe it's not all fake and gay. But then again, on any given Thursday, it may be incredibly fake and gay. And that's the hard part for a lot of people to wrap their heads around, because they don't want to sound like a kook and say, well, central banks are, some central bank is out there trying to destroy the United States, or do this terrible thing, and then create a narrative in the media that supports that thing, when that's really the default position everybody should have. And I know that that's hard for a lot of guys who do these podcasts wearing suits, as opposed to showing up in well, frankly, their pajamas, and then doing them again, and doing what I do, right? Like, I don't care if people think I'm a kook. I don't care if people think I'm rude or crude or anything else. What I am is a guy looking at the state of the markets, looking at the intentions of the people that manipulate these markets and act in these markets. And I think to myself, okay, well, if they were going to hurt the US, or they were going to try to affect some kind of outcome, be it feather their own nests or hurt somebody else or whatever, then how would they do that? And then if you see that occurring, and all the downstream effects of them trying to do X, Y, and Z, and that happens, well, then you have to present it that way. You can't present what you'd like to see. You have to present what you do see. So I was as confused as everybody else with the way the market was acting on Tuesday night coming into Wednesday morning last week. And then last week, it became very quickly very obvious as to what was blowing up, right? And then, which was the so-called basis trade, which is simply just a bet against. It's not a bet; it's just playing the spread between Treasury futures and spot price treasuries. And most futures prices should be trade. Futures generally trade at an arbitrage, at a durable spread over the spot price. It doesn't matter what it is. Either commodity markets when they're in contango, or other markets where they're in backwardation. It doesn't really matter. But people will play the basis trade in order to try and scoop up some pennies, because it's a one-way trade, and people like one-way trades because one-way trades make money, especially if you can take that one-way trade and lever it up 25 or 30 or 40 times, and then you can make money worth taking on the risk. Apparently, I don't think that risk is, in the case of the Treasury bond market basis, the Treasury market basis trade. I don't consider that trade a particularly good one-way trade, unless, of course, it is that it's kind of being used as a stick, right, as a threat, an unfired gun at those that think they want to, price treasuries differently than what they want the treasuries to be priced at. Then they become a gun that you can then fire, because then that hedge fund blows up, their counterparties start to lose money, everybody starts to scramble, and then there's chaos in the markets, and then the first thing that happens after that is everybody starts screaming, okay, well, why did that happen? Well, if it happens in proximity to a big change in policy, I don't know, the Federal Reserve raising interest rates 75 basis points, or Donald Trump putting on historically high tariffs, or something along those lines, or Brexit or whatever, then you can see what will happen if you mix that plus timing plus incentive, and you get what detectives call motive, means, and opportunity. Right? That's all I'm doing. I'm playing Columbo here. I've even got a cigar. The only thing I'm missing is the ugly trench coat. So I've even got the vestiges of the New York accent. So not a lot, but I have some. So I could give you the New York accent, but I don't want to do that anymore. I don't talk like that anymore. So I think that's what happened last week, and I think that the smoking gun here is in the cross market analysis, where we saw the euro rise, we saw the British pound rise, and we saw the Canadian dollar rise, and we didn't see the Chinese yuan rise significantly. It and the yen started to move on Friday, but on Wednesday, at the height of the turmoil, it was the euro and the Canadian dollar. Now, who's in charge of Canada right now? Mr. Euro himself, Mark Carney. Okay? Did Mr. Mark Carney threaten war against Donald Trump from Canada? Yes. Did the Canadians bomb the Baldwins, to quote South Park? Yes. And they're they're now threatening to take a terrible toll on the Arquette family to continue, to quote that freaking movie, which was hilarious. And I'm like, and that's ultimately where I came down on this. I'm like, oh, that's fine. And did they get what they wanted? Well, maybe, because Donald Trump pulls back and effectively exempts everybody from the tariffs as long as they're willing to come to the table. But the funny part about all this, Ben, is that Trump really didn't put any tariffs on Canada. What he said was, I'm putting a huge reciprocal tariff on anything that flows through Canada that's not in compliance with the USMCA, the U.S. Mexican-Canada trade agreement. If you're making the parts in Canada, there's no tariff. But if you're buying the parts in China, slapping a made in Canada label on them and then sending them into the United States, no, that we're going to snuff out, that we're going to drop a big tariff on. Those tariffs are still in place. Same thing for the European Union, by the way. Steel, automotives, aluminum, stuff like that. It's all those tariffs are still in place. But what Trump did was he did what he always does, which is he goes in and he said, big, huge number, 94% tariff on Vietnam, or whatever it was, 47%, or whatever it was. And then, of course, knowing that he's not going to keep that, but we're going to watch to see who reacts and how, right? So what we got was exactly kind of what we should have expected to get. The funny, which is that China, the EU, Canada all complained bitterly, right? China slaps on retaliatory tariffs. They go back and forth, blah, 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 blah. No one really cares, because at the end of the day, it's all on the bill of lading of the component parts, not the final product. We're not slapping 125% tariff on the retail price, the MSRP of an iPhone. Okay? We're slapping a 125% tariff on the 30-cent on the 30-cent op amp that goes into the iPhone, and now that's going to cost 62 cents or whatever. It's not. I mean, there aren't a whole lot of op amps in an iPhone, but you get my point. It's on the component parts that were sourced overseas. That's what pays the tariff. That's what's tariffed, not the final cost. And anybody conflating those two things is selling you something, and what they're selling you is a trade war that doesn't really exist. What they're selling you.
So the iPhone's not going to cost.
Is a madman.
So the iPhone's not going to cost $30,000 if we make it in the U.S. is what you're saying? Have you seen that article?
I haven't seen that article, but I think it's hilarious that people are that dumb. The funny part about it is that most of the iPhone is actually produced here in the United States, and then it's shipped overseas to be assembled. Oh, by the way, just saying, because the assembly is cheaper over there than it is here because we don't have the assembly plants over here. Okay, fine.
Yeah. So as far as how you kind of see this playing out between U.S. and China or U.S. and Europe, I know a lot of people are talking about, Europe selling bonds, bring that money back to put in the stock market, put it in other stuff. China's like, it was basically every country from China, Japan, Europe, and then you have the basis trade that you're talking about a little bit. But what do you kind of see as far as the different countries and their actions, and how you kind of see kind of resolution potentially playing out on the whole tariff situation?
Well, I find it really funny that they tried to throw Japan under the bus. The minute people figured out it was the basis trade that was blowing up, so the first thing they did that I saw was that the next morning I woke up on Thursday, and it was, oh my God, Japan is doing it. At first it was China on Monday, then it was the basis trade on Tuesday night, then by Wednesday afternoon it was Japan. When the reality was the entire time it was Europeans. It was City London. Japan made multiple moves to say, look, we're not angry with Trump for doing this. Like, we saw unsourced rumors. The Japanese are hopping mad about that. Meanwhile, President Ishiba comes to, makes a statement. And I think he actually came to visit Trump. And he's like, oh, yeah, no, I have no problem, keeping Trump happy here. Like, to be honest with you, Japanese automakers are some of the most based manufacturers in the world. They make all their cars that they sell here in America. They make them in red states and in some of the poorest counties in all of America. Like, Nissan has a plant in Mississippi, one of the poorest places in the country, right? So, like, and it's the same all over the country. If you look, somebody posted a map on Twitter today of where all the Japanese the Japanese car companies make all their cars that they sell in the U.S. And it's like, ain't no blue states in there. They're not making these things in Rhode Island, by the way. Not making them in Connecticut, not making them in Jersey, not making them in California. They're making them in, Indiana and Mississippi and Alabama and everywhere else. Why? No state income tax, low regulations. They can cut good deals with local governments. Local governments are happy to have them. They create jobs, blah, 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 blah. And there's not going to be a tariff on any of them. Okay. So then you have, like, what was the first deal that Trump announced after he won the presidency? Was that SoftBank was going to come in and put $500 billion into the United States? You think the Japanese are angry with us? Really? Okay. I mean, you can believe that, but then, I would ask you to I'd also ask you how things are over on Blue Sky or Mastodon or some of these other enclaves, these other, ridiculously bad social media platforms that they can't build for themselves. So it's not that. Okay. The U.S. and China have a lot of stuff to work out, no doubt. So where are we going from here? Japan's not going to be a problem. Depending on how things go with the Canadian elections in 14 days, we'll determine how things go with Canada. I'm hearing a lot of anger and underneath the surface of what's going on in Alberta. The Albertans are getting ready to really put pressure on Premier Daniel Smith to reject everything that's coming out of Ottawa. And I'll be up there in Calgary in less than a month, and that's going to be an interesting time. So we'll see. Ottawa is, that's old continental Europe. Ottawa, Quebec, that's old continental Europe. And in terms of their political proclivities, the big question everyone should ask themselves, especially since we just saw the announcement, was it yesterday or early this morning, that they busted 3 big fentanyl labs in Vancouver? How does that happen? I was chatting with Alex the other day, and And Alex brought up the point. I think it was on Friday. I was on with Alex on Crypto Rich's show, and we were chatting about it. And he was like, none of this drug activity in Canada happens at the systemic level that it's happening without the Canadian banks doing the money laundering.
Yeah.
So all the Canadian
just
banks,
too big.
Yeah, it's too big. And so the Canadian banks are up to their eyeballs in this. We all know it. And Trump is staring them in the face. At the end of the day, everybody wants to play games with tariffs, and same thing with China. Like, he'll just decharter their banks. He'll just delist their stocks from our stock exchanges. He'll cut them off from real capital. Like, anybody who thinks that they can get into a trade, if they can get into an actual financial war with the United States that is desperate for access to deep and liquid markets and capital markets, is crazy. Okay, it's part of the. It's what the it's what the Biden administration threatened the Russians with, and what the Iranians with, and now I'm not saying that the Chinese couldn't weather that, but can Canada? With whose help? The Russians only did it because they got the Chinese's help. Right? China helped support the Russian ruble and the Russian banking system, and same with Iran, to get around the sanctions. Russia didn't do this on their own. That's Russian propaganda. I'm sympathetic to the Russians doing what they did. I'm not angry with them for surviving, or I'm not, by stating that, I'm not taking anything away from what they did. They were smart. Putin made good deals for Russia. He reacted accordingly, and he was in a position that he could do so, and he had a government structure and that he was able to get that done. I mean, like it or not, Putin's a gangster, and he's good at being a gangster, and he's good at running Russia like a benevolent gangster. No problem. And he got it done. By stating he got help from the Chinese doesn't take away from the fact that he got that done, because the Chinese could have told him to go scratch. And then Putin wouldn't be in power, blah, 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 and then everything would have fallen apart. The neocons would have won, but, and all of that stuff. So, but Canada doesn't have any friends other than they have China, but now China's being attacked at the same time. And Canada also has friends in the EU, and they're being attacked at the same time. So they're small player at the table. And I bring Canada because, well, nominally, the Russians and the Canadians have roughly the same GDP. I mean, if you're going to use GDP as a statistic, like everybody likes to bandy around, I would take the Russian economy over the Canadian economy every day of the week, because the Russians actually build shit, right? So, I don't know. In my mind, but they are similar economies. But you have to have friends. You have to have friends that are going to be willing to give you the swap lines and to be able to give you the inject the capital into your markets. And how are they going to do that? Well, the Chinese and the Europeans are responding to Trump pulling back on global trade and pulling back on global dollar supply and U.S. Treasury supply, nominally by getting rid of, by cutting the deficit and cleaning up the spending, and cutting out all of the money flow into the NGOs around the world and all the rest of it. They're responding to that by systemically now wanting to print, spend. Canada wants to spend, the EU wants to spend, China wants to spend, and they're going to, but they're going to be doing so into a deflation. They're going to be doing so into a deflationary environment for all of them, and they're all in a deflationary environment, both demographically and in terms of credit and everything else. It's all deflationary for them. So now what do you do? Well, if you're in a deflationary spiral, printing is just at this point is just a path to hyperinflation, especially if you lose access to the market where you can export all your goods. These three are all net exporters, and they're all net exporters to the United States. We can do without French cheese. We can do without cheap Chinese footwear from Temu or wherever. We can stop going to Amazon and buying cheap textiles. We can do this. We don't have to buy these things anymore, right? We don't have to do that. These are all consumption / I wouldn't say luxury goods, but I don't know about you, but my wife still shops at thrift stores. You know why? There's great clothes at thrift stores. That's why. People make do. They figure stuff out. They can do substitution, and they don't have to, we'll keep our cars an extra year. We'll do whatever needs to be done. The consumption economy has the ability to cut back on consumption of discretionary items. And the producers of those discretionary items are going to be the ones that are going to have to then figure out where they're going to dump their products. What I find really fascinating is that the 125% tariff on China, and even only the 20% tariff or 10 or 15% tariff, whatever 10 or 20% tariff that Trump put on the EU, well, what does that mean? If they can't sell it to the United States, so guess who's going to get dumped on? Chinese are going to value their currency. You've now lowered your currency to defend it, right? And to defend against, and you've dumped some treasuries. Okay, great. You've done some treasuries. Remember, the Europeans total have like $3.4 trillion worth of treasuries. When you can include Canada and Ireland and the British Virgin Islands and the Bermuda and the Bahamas and the Caymans and all the subsidiaries. And I'm not even counting Singapore in that list. And I'm certainly not even counting Hong Kong, which technically are British-controlled protectorates as well, or British outposts as well. Like, ask yourself the question, if you put all those numbers together, like, it's a lot of money. And it's a lot bigger than China. And that's in central banks. Now, God knows, how much is in, family offices and hedge funds and, blah, 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 that's out there that are all, nominally associated with the CCP. But, I'm not looking at those numbers. But do you think that, those Davos, folks don't also have family offices and hedge funds and, right? Like, any argument you can make for China, you can make an argument for Europe just as easily, if not more so. Right?
Yeah.
So, net, they got a lot of capital and they're angry with us. The Chinese aren't angry with us for not getting involved in the war in Ukraine. The Chinese are not angry with us for trying to craft a peace deal with Iran, even if we're going to do so at the point of a gun, with a gun to the Iranians' heads. Hey, look, this is the way this is the return of power politics. It's not going to be pretty. If y'all want it to be pretty, well, I don't know, go watch a Hallmark movie. I don't have fucking time for this shit. So, the Chinese aren't angry with us about those things. They're not. What they're angry about is the perception that, well, certainly under the Biden administration, that we're continuing to run in concert with the Europeans to close them off from their place in the world. And I mean this, but like looking at because the point is that an attack on Russia is really an attack on China, right? Because what they're really saying is what Europe and under Biden and Obama, what they were saying is we're going to go to war to destroy Russia and break it up into component parts so that we then control the energy flow and the raw material flow into China. We break Russia, then we can break China. Trump is trying to renormalize relations with the Russians, end the war in Ukraine, all this stuff. So the Chinese are very happy with Trump from that perspective. Working out how we deal with this trade deficit problem, the trade flow problem, that's a different story. We have plenty of, so I look at the Chinese as a mixture of kind of put out, they've got their nose out of joint a little bit. They've got a safe face, and they've also been very opportunistic. And at times, they've been running operations on us. I'm not going to argue. But I think that's a solvable problem because I think the Chinese have plenty of cards to play, just like but notice how Trump never says the Chinese have no cards to play. But Europe has no cards to play. Canada has no cards to play. Ukraine has no cards to play. So, it's a complicated game board, but when you get down to the essential weaknesses of each of the players at the table and the strengths of the individual people at the table. The board's actually not that complicated. So, got news for you folks. If you have your money in the European Union, they're not bluffing when they say, we're going to steal your savings. We're going to default on our debt, and you're going to be given digital euros that are a perfect surveillance state mechanism, and you'll probably be paying your income taxes on the fly as they change, the tax rate on a daily basis, because they're going to be running under MMT rules. So, good luck with all that. The United States is talking about getting rid of the, we're literally talking about getting rid of the IRS.
Yeah.
Where do you want money?
No, I think that's interesting too, because you have a lot of people that are looking at markets, and I think the situation from the last 10 or 20 years is kind of how they're viewing things, where it's relatively stable. Money will go where it's treated best, right? A lot of the people are talking about European markets being cheap. It's off to a good start, all this stuff. And I kind of look at it as like, well, if there's capital controls on the way or some of these other things where, like, you see the amount of gold that's coming into the U.S. since the last, call it 3 to 6 months. And the last time that happened was obviously World War I, World War II, some of that. But you kind of see some of these situations, and I think it's a little bit dangerous to be looking at the state of things right now using the old playbook. So that's just kind of what I'm seeing. But I think there's a lot of things changing, and I kind of look at like what's going on in Europe, what's going on in Canada, what's going on in the Middle East. Like, you kind of start to put like a big framework together, and it helps kind of make decisions on, okay, yeah, it might seem funky that the U.S. is trying to eliminate the IRS, get rid of the income tax. I do want to kind of pull on that thread of like cutting deficits, cutting spending, because I know there's been people that have been saying it hasn't been successful so far. The spending has been like massive, and there's no, they haven't basically put a dent in it to this point. And I think the most important part is like cutting off the flow to like the USAID and the ideological things that are really just a negative on negative across the board. And then they'll kind of work their way down to like maybe hitting Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the fraud that's in those programs. Because that's where, like, I think that's where they need to go if they want to put a significant dent in it. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on how that progresses, where you think we could go as far as the income tax, all that stuff.
Sure. I mean, Ben, look, everybody got their expectations way too high, way too fast. Like, Trump comes in like a house on fire, and, they start, cutting, lobbing off, whole sections of the federal government. Then you come to realize that that's not a lot. That's not that much money, but it's important money. It's the marginal flow that goes through all the people who are, like at the beginning, at the let's just start out with, you got to get rid of the spending that's being used to destroy the country.
Yeah.
Like, directly. We're not talking about the indirect way of the welfare state and the warfare state and all the rest of it. It's important, but it's not all the same stuff, and it's not all the same order of importance, and therefore it's not, you don't like do everything on the to-do list all at once. So you do the big ones to start out with, as you pointed out, USAID and NED, the Department of Education, and then you start talking about, okay, how can we cut waste within the DoD? How can we cut waste? Right? How can we cut waste within the HHS and Social Security and everything else? The money's there to be had. The fraud is there to be removed, and there's going to be it's going to take time to properly put all that into context. 1, 2, we're still working off of Biden's last budget. And this is still fiscal year 2025, which was a Biden era budget. Now, there comes a point where there's only so much that the executive branch can do during the existing fiscal year. That's just reality. They've done some, and they've had nothing but lawfare pushback. And if you want to really think of it in terms of what have they actually accomplished, well, what they accomplished was to start the process in motion that they can that they're going to cut these things, then get the judgments from the judicial system that blesses all of this and puts to rest this idea that the president is honor bound to spend all the money that Congress allocates. Congress allocates, the executive disperses. And it's there was a Supreme Court ruling in the 70s, which was unconstitutional and is going to be challenged and is effectively being challenged by the Trump administration now, which says that the president has to spend whatever Congress tells him to spend. And he's like, no, I don't see that in the Constitution. You allocate the money, I choose to spend it. If I choose not to spend it, I give it back to you at the end of the year. You can choose to allocate that money again, or you can give it back to the people. That's up to you to do. But you raise the taxes, you raise the revenue, I spend the revenue. There's a very clear separation of duties here, and it's in the Constitution. And everything else is just bullshit. Everything else is just somebody selling you a line that's not real. It's not true. And we have plenty of judges who, over the years, have acted above their authority. So, in effect, the real goal here was to pave the way for all the big spending cuts that can come by first getting rid of all the potential legal challenges and all the political fighting about it. Cut some stuff, get the people on your side, then have the Democrats and the judicial system get in the way of that when it's clearly the dumbest thing imaginable for them to do politically. You win you're winning political points left and right. And you have the Constitution on your side, and it gives the Supreme Court the cover to do what they need to do. And they don't have to feel intimidated doing the wrong thing. Because the truth of the matter is that we're not living in rule by law. If we were living in a rule by law, guess what, folks? These wouldn't even be discussions. The fact that we have to discuss them, we have to craft arcane legal challenges and mechanisms by which to get through this shit politically, tells you don't live in a world ruled by law. Do we want to return to the rule of law? Well, this is the process by which we get back to it. By shutting up all of the fucking commies who want to destroy the country. And stop listening to them when they bray like donkeys on fucking The View. That's it. Yeah. And think that these people actually have influence or power or brain cells. Because at the end of the day, they're not just braying donkeys, they're programmed braying donkeys. They're NPC donkeys.
It is amazing that people still watch a lot of the mainstream kind of cable outlets, the ones that are still speaking the same talking points. But I do want to kind of get into your view on markets, commodities, and see where you think that's going. Because I know oil had like a 2 or 3 day flush of like $15 a barrel. I look at that, I'm like, okay, some of that's liquidity, some of that's OPEC with a conveniently timed announcement. But I think that's probably not an accident. It came on the same day. So There's definitely things going on there. But I kind of look at the setup now, like gold has obviously been the safe haven, which makes sense when everything else is chaotic. But as far as different things you're watching, whether it's gold, silver, oil, even Bitcoin, if you're wanting to talk about that, like what are you kind of seeing across the commodity complex?
I see that, across the commodity complex and the financialized part of the markets, they're selling a recession trade. An inverted yield curve, massive slams on silver, massive slams on copper, massive slams on oil, right? The sell in a recession trade. Is it real? Is it live? Is it Memorex? I don't know. I know that, I listen to people on Twitter all the time. They're like, well, it's nice that Brent's trading at $58 a barrel. The latest tenders coming out of, Dubai are 72. What's real? What isn't? No one buys Brent crude with the Brent crude contract. They don't deliver barrels of oil on ice to your home if you bought a Brent crude contract. It's a financial contract. It's a speculative bet on the price of oil. Same thing with WTI. The real oil trade happens between buyers and sellers. So, we have commodity futures contracts that don't really exist to do their primary job, and we have to get back to that. And we're starting to get back to that. We're seeing the end of hyper financialized gold with the breakdown of the LBMA, and with the delisting of important contracts on the COMEX that do away with the arbitrage washing trade of trading paper against each other in order to move the price. That's over. Like we're going to be moving to a more physical gold settled market, which which we could see coming the minute that Shanghai opened their doors, 11, 12 years ago, right? So, eventually the market would become much more of a physically settled market. Gold is moving not just because it's a safe haven trade, but because it is what central banks now know they're going to need in order to have collateral to be able to issue currency going forward, to be able to buy energy with if they need to, or settle trade with. So, gold is, the thing that everybody's going to need in a world where we can't trust debt to be the reserve anymore. So, yeah, the end of the dollar reserve standard is in process. Trump kind of like signaled, oh yeah, by the way, it's over and we're moving away from it. He's not saying, stop using the dollar in trade settlement, right? He's not saying, hey, are you not going to take our dollars? Oh yeah, you're going to take our dollars in trade, or I'm going to sanction the shit out of you. Fine. He's not saying you have to recycle into our treasuries. You can go buy something else if you want. And, we'll do whatever we have to do on the other side of it. But at the end of the day, gold is going to wind up being the settlement layer amongst all of these central banks. And I think that the big one of the things that's interesting, you brought up Bitcoin. I'll bring up something that I've been talking around and about for a long time now. But let's talk about all this noise around stablecoins. Scott Bessent is talking about stablecoins. Everybody in the administration is not talking about stablecoins. Well, why? Well, because what's the euro dollar? The euro dollar is a stablecoin. It's offshore digital dollar sitting in accounts being used to liquefy financial markets overseas. Well, but in the past, they didn't really need collateral posted under LIBOR. You could just trade uncollateralized dollar obligations in order to get access, in order to count them as reserves and count them as an asset and use them as collateral. That day is over. And stable coins, properly regulated ones like Tether, which is why Tether was given the imprimatur, was why Tether was given the stamp of approval, by the way. Okay. I'm not, there are people out there accusing me of shilling for Tether. I'm like, I'm just reading the board, dude. Fuck off. Like, Tether was given the blessing to continue existing as the stablecoin pair to trade against Bitcoin. And what is Tether? It winds up in that context, and winds up being a hot sink for U.S. Treasury demand. If Bitcoin trading goes up, then Tether's market share has to go up in order to print enough Tethers to liquefy the Bitcoin Tether trade, right? Tether's apparently overcapitalized. Every time they put out their little quarterly report to the SEC or to the Southern District of New York, it's, they're overcapitalized. They mostly hold U.S. treasuries, which you would expect. Treasury, a little bit of gold, a little bit of Bitcoin, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But for the most part, they own, short-term treasuries, and they own some long-term treasuries as well. Well, guess what? any other stable coin that's going to be blessed by the United States is going to have that same backing. And in order to get those stable coins, someone's going to have to post collateral in order to, in effect, someone has to post the collateral in order for that to, treasuries for that to, for those to be minted, right? Well, guess what? That's putting a big crimp on the supply of treasuries. What's Donald Trump want to do? Balance the budget, putting a big crimp on the future supply of treasuries. If the U.S. bond markets were as unhealthy as Davos and company wanted to make them look during last week's crazy, we would not have had a stellar 10-year and a stellar 30-year auction. I'm using Zero Hedge's own words, and Zero Hedge is the biggest friggin' dollar bear there is. And they're like, "Wow, that was the best 10-year auction we've ever seen." Yeah, because they moved the friggin' 10-year up 25 basis points when they were, in 48 hours before the auction, and those same buyers would have been happy to buy at 4.25%. And now they're paying and now they're getting 4.5%. Jubilee celebration, folks. What a shock. You move the friggin' 30-year up to 4.85, and you don't think that they're not going to be gorging themselves on 30-year treasuries? So there's no shortage of demand out there for U.S. treasuries and for U.S. dollar denominated obligations because people need hard collateral. So, yeah, okay. Davos spent a lot of money. And then what? What did they do? They sold a little high. They bought a little low. They made a little money on the spread. They had to move the euro up 9%. They had to move the Canadian dollar up 9%. And they're going to lose on the tariff war. So net, yeah, everybody shot their wad. But now we have clarity. They're the enemy. And we know what to do now. Everything else is chasing. But as far as commodities are concerned, go back to your original question, I see more tight supply into a reorganizing world, out of financial assets, out of financialization, out of cheap consumer goods, out of whatever, and into new infrastructure spending all the way across the board. So I think $4.50 copper is cheap. I think $33 silver is a steal. Do I think silver's $1,000 an ounce? Please. Who am I, Mike Maloney? Like, come on.
Yeah, it is funny to see some of the charts people will throw out on where silver's headed eventually. It's like, yeah, I think we go to all-time highs before the end of the decade, but that's about as strong of a view.
Oh, I think we'll go higher than that.
No,
I think we'll see I think we'll see 3-digit silver.
Definitely.
In a spike.
But I'm just saying, like $800,000, $900,000.
No, we're never going back to 16-1. We have to get a government say, I'm building a strategic silver reserve.
Yeah. No, it is.
I don't see that happening. I might see it happen if we descend into war, open kinetic war.
Yeah,
I don't see any of the big players
war
at the table having any desire for a big kinetic war, other than Europe getting us to fight their big kinetic war for them.
Yeah. So that leads to the next question here. I know a lot of people have started to talk about what Europe wants to do in Ukraine. There's been some headlines that make me a little bit nervous as far as like them rearming or what's going on in Poland, what's going on in Germany and England, France, all those places.
No, they're getting ready for war.
Yeah. How do you
handle it? They're ready to occupy Western Ukraine in order to stop the Russians. That's what and then they're hoping that they get into a war, and then they're going to look to the United States and the West and go, "You have to help us," and we're like, "Yeah, no."
Yeah. How do you handicap that versus like the Middle East versus what's going on in China? And kind of, I look as like there's a lot of stuff moving. I don't think we're going to get into some economic trade war that collapses the world economy with China, but the Middle East is kind of chaotic, and Ukraine I see being more likely, at least near term, to flare up. So how do you handicap all those situations?
The Russians are going to continue to take as much territory as they can in Ukraine, putting pressure on somebody to make a deal. Trump is going to, he's going to be not happy with Putin one week and happy the next week. Talks apparently are going very well between the Iranians and the United States. The Iranians have put their big demand on the table, and I think it was the right demand for them to put on the table. I haven't said a lot of nice things about Iran recently, so I'm going to throw one at them. I'm going to throw them a bone. And because I don't think they have very many cards to play. I'm not saying that at the end of the day, here's the gig. So first round of indirect talks with Steve Witkoff in Iran and Oman went pretty well. We're going to have new set of talks next week in Rome. Oh, Rome, you say? Really? Italy, the United States, getting together like peanut butter and chocolate. Are you kidding me? That's important. But what did Iran put on the table? Iran put on the table that we'll be happy to sign whatever peace agreement you want. And Tulsi Gabbard, our DNI, our Director of National Intelligence, from information given to her by the rest of the U.S. intelligence agencies, Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon. Now, either Tulsi is an idiot, which she's not, or the whole idea, or the whole Benjamin Netanyahu story, Iran is less than a year away from a nuclear weapon. They have been less than a year away from a nuclear weapon since, I had hair.
Yeah, since my entire life.
Yeah, your entire life, right? So, no, what did Iran put on the table? Happy to sign whatever peace treaty you want, as long as Israel signs the nuclear non-proliferation treaty and gets rid of their nukes. That seems reasonable. Israel gets rid of their nukes. Iran's not making a nuke. The United States guarantees Israel's good behavior. The Russians guarantee Iran's good behavior. It's not like the Russians want Iran having a nuclear weapon. And Turkey sits between the two of them like the sumo wrestler stuffed into the net at a hockey game, going, "Yeah, I dare you to score on me." Because I take up the whole net. I never understood why the NHL didn't just go to sumo wrestlers in hockey pads and goalie pads.
Yeah, there are a couple.
He doesn't even need to move. He just stands there for 60 minutes.
Yeah,
I think we may have to make the nets bigger. You think? And then look at the size of NHL goaltenders today and their pads. I'm like, they pretty much have adopted that model. But these guys are that and athletic, so it's and as athletic as Dominic Hasek used to be. But be that as it may, you've got Turkey in the middle just saying, yeah, everybody play nice now. And Trump going out of his way to mention this to Netanyahu at the press conference. I just laugh. I laugh at people who think that Donald Trump is not in charge. I laugh. When I listen to it, I'm like, really? I'm watching geopolitical flex after geopolitical flex, and it's funny actually. And I didn't give Trump a lot of credit for a while because in the interregnum, because honestly, he didn't look like he had figured this shit out, but he gets it, and he gets it in a way now that I think is worth pursuing and worth taking very seriously. And we'll find out. I think a lot of people are going to do what Bill Maher did last week, which is find out that Donald Trump, the person, is far different than the character he plays on TV.
Yeah. As far as where you see things heading for geopolitical situation and financial markets over the next 3 to 6 months, whether it's equities, commodities, or bonds, all these kind of things that kind of fit together as far as some of the things that you watch, where do you think the big picture, where does that head over the next 3 to 6 months? Because I'm kind of assuming there's a resolution as far as tariffs and the trade war and some of those things. But what do you kind of see coming as far as the near future into the back half of 2025?
Well, I think sell in May and come back after Labor Day still holds, no matter what nobody wants to admit this, but it's true. So we're probably looking at either let's watch to see if last week's lows hold in the Dow. Right, I think that's a fair thing. And the Dow, the S&P, the Nasdaq, if they all hold through the end of the month, we get a couple weeks into the future, and we get through the end of the month, and it's a bad month, but the Dow closes, well off of those intra-month lows. It's probably over. Same thing with the Nasdaq, same thing with the S&P, and then it'll be just grind out until Labor Day while Trump and company work different angles of whatever their plan is. And I don't know what they're going to do next, right? But whatever comes next, because we don't know what's going to come next because it's Donald Trump and he keeps everybody in the dark. And I would rather at this point react to what I see than try to predict what he's going to do next. Because predicting his next move is a mug's game because you never know what he's going to do. Even though he usually tells you, I mean, you usually figure it out. It's clear that he's moving back into foreign policy after tariff talk. So we're going to let the trade negotiations go on for a while, let them percolate in the background. He'll then go back to the border, or he'll go, he's going to start working on taxing. He's going to working on taxes in the budget for the upcoming year, I think is also a big thing. Remember, in the midst of all of this, somehow the House passed the budget resolution, which codifies the Trump tax cuts, codifies some of the new ideas, some of the new tax cuts. Like, this stuff is all moving forward. He's getting it done. And everybody is like focused over here on tariffs. And quietly in the background, we had a budget passed. We had a budget continuing resolution passed. Now we can work on some rescission stuff, some ideas about, we can now rescission out some things in the rest of the budget. And then we can start getting, they can start playing that game that way. Again, Trump is smart in that he understands exactly how much the public can take at any one moment in time. So you focus on this thing and you message it this way. It leaves out this nuance, it leaves on that nuance, it leaves out this, it leaves out that. But the major thrust and the major message gets through loud and clear. Then he acts on that, plays the game back and forth, negotiates, settles, does his thing. Then he moves on to another thing and educates everybody on that thing. Does the same thing. Meanwhile, the thing he was talking about last week is quietly chunking away in the background. Trade deals are being worked on, tariffs are being negotiated, everything has happened. It's like, but we live in this space where everybody needs to react on a daily basis to everything. And I've gotten to the point now where I tend to adopt the 48-hour rule of just waiting to see what happens after 48 hours when the big thing happens. Like, I didn't react to the tariff thing, the tariff schedule thing at all. I'm like, let's see how this plays out. Oh, look, the Europeans are screaming. Oh, look, Mark Carney is making an ass out of himself. Oh, look, the Chinese are slapping reciprocal tariffs on. Oh, look, everybody else is coming to the table. I'm going to assume that was the right outcome, because why else would you put that schedule out the way you did? I'm not saying that Trump is playing 6D chess, because I don't, or 4D chess or anything along those lines. I think that's a dumb metaphor. I think it's an easy, dumb way of destroying the conversation. It's designed to, destroy the conversation, destroy having a rational discussion about what's going on. He's just playing 6D chess. No, he's not. But he is allowed to make moves on the board and think 2 moves ahead. That's not playing 6D chess, folks. That's just being a good player. Don't hate the play, hate the game. Right? So if you don't like the game, but to think that, you say that because what you want to say, because that's who you work for, when you hear people say this, that Trump is just an abreacting monkey and he has no plan. He keeps beating you. Maybe he's just better at the game than you are, and you just refuse to accept it. I wouldn't play poker against Donald Trump. Fuck that noise. Like, dude's been in the room with every powerful figure on the face of this planet over the last 50 years. You don't think he doesn't know how the game is played? Do we forget who he actually is? I mean, there's the character he plays on TV, and then there's the guy in the room. I've been susceptible to that thinking in the past. I only say this now as someone who's, got caught up in it in the past. Like, I can admit my sins. Can you? I'm not speaking to you, Ben. I'm speaking to members of the audience who are having a hard time with this, who've still got Trump derangement syndrome. The worst thing than Trump derangement syndrome is Zionist derangement syndrome. Because the Zionists are everywhere. It's like this. It might as well be the new Red Scare, for Christ's sake. What I mean, when the Red Scare never went away, they still really are all commies. Like, I don't know. I'm a little tired now, so I've been doing this all day. So
yeah. Do you, as far as what you see for financial markets, I know a lot of sharp people in calling for capital rotation, all that stuff. I think it's interesting because you look at valuations and you see that in other places, but at the same time, you have all these other dynamics where I don't think like big tech, for example, is a great place to hide out because the valuation's there, but I still think there's plenty of opportunities in the US in kind of different parts of the market. But I know a lot of people are looking at Europe, looking at other international markets. Do you see kind of
looking at Europe? Europe's overvalued. DAX is trading. The DAX is spent Q1 breaking out to an all-time high. If anything, right now the Dow is cheap relative to Germany, relative to the European stock markets. Euro Stoxx 50, their Dow. I cover this stuff all the time for the patrons. Like, that stuff is all like, now it's rolling over. Now the fun part's going to be, does it roll over harder than it rallied earlier in the year? And does the Dow stabilize? And if that's the case, well, that's going to be interesting. We'll see. Big piles of money sloshing around everywhere. I still think that at the end of the day, what got lost and what I really meant earlier was that I think the commodities are going to be a good play. I still think they're underserved. I still think they're undervalued. I still think, gold miners are good. Gold miners are undervalued. Good oil stocks are, look, oil's trading at what, $64 a barrel or $63 a barrel, whatever. It may be a fictitious price, but then why is Shell putting up, record numbers? Why are the oil majors all trading near 52-week highs? PDE's a 6.
Someone's
throwing up 6 to 8% dividends.
Yeah.
Transportation stocks are going to do well in this. Coal stocks are going to do well. Energy across the board. And then at some point, I think once the markets really digest what's going on here, the long-term play in the United States is going to be the Russell 2K. Right, because small caps are going to be where the money flows into, because there's going to be investment capital pouring into the United States. It's not going to go into the existing big markets. It's going to go into the small. If Trump deregulates, if Trump lowers taxes, then it's going to be small businesses that do really well. It's going to be small caps. But right now, they're not responding to this in the short term because it's turmoil. Who's going to buy small caps right now? Like right now, no one knows what anything is going to look like. But once the dust settles, you guys start coming into the fall, the small caps might be a really good play, depending on their valuations relative to the Dow and the S&P. The international capital will flow into the blue chips. It's the first order. Where does the money? Where does the new investment capital go? It's going to go to the places that are really underserved. And if Trump gets through, and this is what scares the shit out of Davos, by the way. It doesn't scare the crap out of China. China doesn't give a shit. Scares the crap out of Davos because they don't want small businesses. They want top-down control, and they want everybody to be starving, gasping feudal serfs. They don't want small business to do well. So if Trump is successful, even half successful at what he's trying to do, well, if this is a Main Street administration, then the Russell 2K is going to be the place to put your money. Would be my bet.
Interesting. Is there, as we're starting to wrap up here, is there anything I glossed over or missed that you would want to wrap up with as far as any ideas or stuff you're seeing outside of anything we already hit on?
I don't think so. Right now, this is the stuff that's on everybody's head, but go, don't get what I would, the big thing for me is at this point, just continue to watch the people who were screaming. They're the ones whose oxes are being gored. You know who's losing the trade war or the change in global financial architecture based on those who are screaming the most and saying that you can't do this and that Trump is an idiot. And, they're all associated with the Democrats. See, the usual suspects, Davos, the CCP, Democrats, all that. They're the ones losing their minds. They're the ones that are losing their access to the corridors of power. And because of that, as long as they continue to scream and scream bloody murder, everything's on everything is proceeding as was planned, or to quote Emperor Palpatine, as I have foreseen, right? So if you watch it that way, then it'll become pretty obvious, and as long as Trump's approval numbers don't begin to wane. So watch to see what he does next to show up his approval numbers. Watch to see what's the next big thing that comes out of his mouth and see how people react to that. And I'll bet you the same people will be complaining about it. Every day that he goes forward, watch Italy very carefully for a trade deal that if they sign a bilateral trade agreement with the United States, Ursula von der Leyen will lose her mind. And she will, and there will be a strike back from Davos over that. Because if Italy does that, Italy will have carve-outs. And I'd watch Italy very carefully. They're the fulcrum on which a lot of Trump's European strategy hinges.
Interesting. Definitely a lot to think about, lots of stuff going on. But I do have to ask my traditional closing question, which is, what book should I add to my reading list? I think last time you gave me Ubik and also Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldridge.
Yeah, by Philip K. Dick. Yep. I think, sorry, followed by, what was the last one?
Those were the two, Ubik and...
Yeah, those are nice, simple, short reads and understand like the way fake salvations are created, right? The way fake realities are created for you. I am on a kick. I want to make Stephen Donaldson profitable again. Everybody should read Thomas Covenant.
All right.
Everybody should go back and reread Thomas. If you read it when you were my age and you were in your teens, you need to read it again as an adult. And if you've never read them, and then when you're done with Covenant, you'll realize that you should just read all of Stephen Donaldson, like every last fucking word. He's that good. And he was there the entire time, staying based and telling us where things were going while the world went woke. And that's why he went from the most celebrated fantasy writer in the world to a guy no one knows his name today, 40 years later. And it's a shame. So I'd start there, folks.
Definitely have to check that one out. And it sounds like check out not just that book from his writing, but if the audience is looking to find your work, they should be familiar by now. But where can they find you on social media or your website?
I use Twitter, X, TFL1728. A worse version of me will show up every day to be as snarky as humanly possible. Patreon/Gold Goats and Guns if you want to support the work directly. And if you just can't get enough of this, and the website where we put the podcasts and everything else together on a regular basis is over at tomluongo.me or goldgoatsandguns.com.
Yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. And compared to some of the other stuff that's out there, I think it's very helpful to put a perspective on how some of these things are interconnected. So I think with that, we'll be wrapping up. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.